I assume we can start. So this is supposed to be like open discussion actually session. So that means Leonard probably will spend some 5-10 minutes to show this up, maybe less. And then we will just start to accept questions and reply to them. And first of all, let me introduce, this is Leonard Daly from Khronos and the company that's up. And this is Emmett Lalish from Google. I'm Alexei Sorry, I'm from Meta, yeah. So, and let's start.
So the questions have been on complex scenes, sometimes called glXF. This is an example. I won't go into the details. We're saving that one for tomorrow for the 3D commerce presentation. But each of these three objects are separate files, GLBs, that have been brought in together under a single system. I don't have all the pieces here correctly done, so I don't want to go into a whole lot of details. But just to show that this one has been discussed. So picking up a question earlier from Alfredo about logos and marks and what you do about that, we have here on display. We have the glass hurricane candle holder, which has the glTF mark and a Khronos mark. And the question is, how do we handle these things? What assignments do we do? How are they protected? And this question came up actually several months ago, and we have a nearly complete solution, meaning we have it in draft form. It just needs to be final polished and put up on the website. And the issue is not just the logo mark, but every company has restrictions on how the logo can be used, such as no distortions, no crowding. The color has to be exactly right and everything else. And as soon as you go into 3D, there's distortions, there's crowding, there's coloring is never exactly what it was supposed to be. And we have the example here of the glTF logo, which you can see gets distorted in the projection plane of the screen, and the Khronos mark has the same thing. What we came up with was a solution that the logo must maintain its visual integrity. So it can be applied to an object that causes a distortion, such as the curve in this lamp, but it has to be correctly applied almost as if it was a decal. So it can be applied to objects such as trucks that have rivets and panels and things that stick out and in, and that's all okay because that's what you see in the real world. And so the Khronos logo guidelines are in the process of being changed to allow this, and that we can use the Khronos logos in this manner. Now, that doesn't mean we can use somebody else's logos. We have to get a permission from them. They may have to change their guidelines or have very explicit permission for this to work. But it does provide a basis for other companies to potentially make modifications to their logo guidelines. So, okay, so also for in these cases, the logos are baked into the texture files. So the image textures here have the logos in there. The files are marked as, since all these models are CC BY in this particular case, the image texture is marked as CC BY to cover like the coloring of the glass. But it's also indicated that there's a logo present, and the logo, just because the logo is used in this context, and this context is CC BY, doesn't mean that you can strip out the logo. So it has a caveat and an additional license applied to that. Now, the other thing is, you don't license logos, you don't copyright logos. They're handled separately because they're intellectual property. There's a whole legal structure for that. You just say it's a trademark of and must be used in accordance with the guidelines.
So the question we get maybe more often is, hey, I'm invested a lot in making this beautiful 3D model. I'm putting it up on the web for people to be able to see. I don't want anyone to steal it. That's a much harder question. A lot of effort went into DRM and video to make that possible. Don't expect anytime soon those pipelines to exist in 3D. The simple fact is, there's lots of ways that you can obfuscate a 3D model, that you can make it somewhat more difficult for somebody to find it. But the fact of the matter is, there is no lock. that data is always possible to be scraped if somebody feels like writing a program to snoop into the WebGL driver, right? So the fact is, whenever somebody brings that up, we say, okay, the key is to think about what is your use case? What are you trying to sell? What are you trying to paywall? How are you trying to do this? And usually the best answer is exactly the same as for photography, right? The photographer wants to sell their photo. They also want to show you the picture so that you'll buy it, right? So the way that they do that is by having an extremely high res, high quality picture that they're going to sell, and they have a much downsampled version of that that's nice for looking at on a web browser, but is not great for putting up as art on your home. And that's a great way to think about 3D as well, because fundamentally those textures are all pixels. It actually works the same way. And so if you think about having your extremely high resolution model and that's the thing that you're selling, then if you laud that down to something that's much better for delivery on a mobile device, then you also don't have to be afraid of somebody stealing that, because it's really not the thing that's valuable, right? And so that's the most common advice we give to people about this. Other than that, it's just the usual DMCA of like, hey, if somebody stole your thing, you know, you have legal rights, of course, because it's copyrighted. But in terms of a technological solution, that's probably your best bet. Right. So the question is, you know, you want to be able to show the full quality to make sure that people are really going to buy the thing that you care about. Well, again, it depends primarily upon your use case, right? The hope, if you have a really high quality thing, is that it's going to be viewed somewhere that's not just a mobile device, right? There's the potential too, you know, the usual thing is you are only able to determine the quality, to see it, if you actually zoom in very deeply, right? To the point where you can't see the whole model at once. So another option is you carve off a small swatch of the model and you say, okay, you can look at this in very high resolution, and then you can look at the whole thing in low resolution. But again, you haven't actually given away the whole model to do that.
So to follow up on that, my understanding of glTF, and I don't know much, but what if you convert like another 3D file to glTF and then you apply a texture to it? Is the model and the texture, are they licensed separately?
They can be.
They can be?
So with any artistic item, every artistic process that's done by a person can apply a separate copyright. And when you have a copyright, you can apply a separate license. So for example, if you go to a museum and you see this Jackson Pollock picture that you really like, and you take a picture of it, that photo has 2 copyrights and 2 licenses on it. One from the original painting and one from your photograph, because you made artistic decisions as terms of lighting, the angle which you put it in there, other things that might or might not be in the scene.
Right.
So typically with 3D models, you have the model piece, there's the textures or the surface coatings, and then there's animation. There may be others too, but those are the typically 3 ones you deal with.
Although realistically, in accordance with that, right, it's very common to remix 3D models, to change them, to sculpt them, to modify them. So really, you know, that could happen at any stage, and at any level, right? You could have pieces of one and pieces of another, and this is why it's really important to understand the licensing of things that you're remixing and reusing, right?
And that's another thing in the sample asset repo that we've set up. Almost everything is licensed as CC BY or CC0, which is also known as public domain, depending upon where you are. So it makes it much easier to use those. So then it's just a matter of getting the credits, and we do display the credits involved. And of course, if you're talking about what can go into the metaverse, it's all bets are off at the moment, because typically what you see on the screen is what you want to take in, and so you can scrape it and cheat.
Are we doing like a Q&A?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much Q&A. Just go ahead if you have.
So the other thing is, so in the 2D world, you know, you have like computer graphics image recognition, where, you know, AI can identify, hey, this is a car. Does something similar exist for 3D at the moment?
I'm sure there's a bunch of researchers working on it. There's probably some things that even work halfway decently. I mean, honestly, the way I would do it, frankly, is just you render the 3D object, you get a 2D image, you pass it right into the 2D image AI pipeline, right? Because that's probably going to work just fine. That's by far the simplest way. Potentially, you could do like a better job if you did, a whole bunch of built a big model out of 3D stuff. But the fact is, there's so much more data in the 2D realm. It's probably much easier to just go that route. Certainly, for instance, that's what we do internally at Google when we're dealing with we want to make sure that our 3D models are okay for safe search, right? We build all that on the 2D pipeline because it's well proven.
So, for example, the self-driving cars and robotics all look at things in 3 space. And I know they do train a lot of robots that are supposed to self-move around an environment. They do train them in virtual scenes because it's a lot easier and faster to do that. They can build up the scenes. The Roomba builds up a scene, a concept of what your room is or house is, at least at a floor level. So there is quite a bit of recognition using multiple sensors, some visual, some not.
Thank you.